Well, a big g'day there to everybody in the Bordertown district. It's Graham Anderson here from Agriculture Victoria, just providing a bit of an update on looking at long-term rainfall record for your part of the world and what's behind the wetter and drier seasons, and an update on seasonal forecasting. And rainfall to date this year, you can sort of see over this part of the world's had a bit over the 100 millimetres mark, and there's just been a pretty decent rainfall event this week, but unfortunately I think you guys missed out over there, and there was a little bit of rain falling further to the east and further north, but it missed you guys. So here's better luck with the next event. And this is rainfall to date for Wolseley, not far from your place, but obviously some summer thunderstorms there kick things off. This is 100 mil and started the season all right. This is compared to long-term average, but then looks like you missed out there in April. This is not a bad site, just looking at soil water, soil moisture. It's a Bureau's new site, basically comparing to long-term average. This is soil moisture for April, and when you look at your part of the world, you're either in this below average or very much below average, which is sort of the decile 10 range. So there's nothing surprising there. A few areas got a bit of extra rainfall in some of those summer thunderstorms, but largely waiting for to make up for that previous dry. And the last 3 months, okay, February to April, this is just a decile map. Now, decile 1 is where rainfall's been within the equivalent of the driest 10% of years, the equivalent of, and this sort of colour is where rainfall in the last 3 months been in the equivalent of the wettest 10% of years, and this is average. So you can see some parts of Australia's had, fairly wet last 3 months, and WA off to a great start with some decile 10s through there. Our part of the world's been more average and with a bit drier to the north. But I guess one of the key things, we're still living with the legacy of 2015 rainfall. So this is for the 12 months, 2015, and you can sort of see, you're right on that line where we're around that decile 1 and a bit of decile 2 to 3 to the further north, and quite a few places got average or a bit wetter last year as well. I guess the key thing though for your part of the world, this is the last 2 years, 2014 and 2015 combined, and you can sort of see this stretch, which includes your part of the world, but the Bureau has that down as one of the lowest 2-year periods of rainfall in record for your part of the world. So looking for things to improve. Going back a couple of years, 2010 and 11, we remember it was pretty wet, decile 10, but not just here, all the way across the whole country it was wet. So there's a broader question about, well, where did all that moisture come from, and that's what we'll talk about in a tick. And even if we include those couple of wetter years, this is just going back to 1997 to 2015, so sort of 18-year period, and this is our growing season, April-October rainfall. I guess there's a bit of a broader pattern there where our cooler season rainfall, compared to the long-term average, we've been having a run of drier years through there. So we'll just talk about what might be behind that and what's good old-fashioned variability and what might be a little. Okay, so here we've got long-term rainfall record for Bordertown, and it goes all the way back to 1881, all the way through to 2015. And here we've got millimetres of rainfall. This is the long-term average here. 479 millimetres is the long-term average, and these are years that are wetter. You can see almost up to 800 millimetres in the wettest year, and then those really dry years you can see down to sort of just over 200, 250 millimetres. So there you can see that long-term variation all the way through that record, and a few of these dry years. You can see the 67 drought there, the 82, 06, and those couple of recent years fairly dry. Probably one thing in terms of that pattern there, since the sort of late 70s, you've probably had a few more dry years, and looks like there were a few wetter decades there from the sort of World War II through to the 80s there. So missing a few of those really wet years by the looks of it in the recent record. Looking now at Bordertown for summer, the long-term average is 69 millimetres, a lot of variability in the pattern there, and you can just see that summer of 2010-11 was pretty extraordinarily wet. The tropics came down to visit. Autumn at Bordertown, you can see plenty of variability there, but as we've seen probably in a lot of southeastern Australia, that autumns since in a lot of places since the 80s there's been a lack of sort of wet autumns, and that's fairly consistent in a lot of places. So we'll talk a little bit about what might be behind that. And winter, you can see a lot of variability there. That's the wettest season, and 173 millimeters is the average. Plenty of variability there. Can't really see any strong trends in that one. And spring, 130 mils, the long-term average. A lot of variability there. I guess just noticed you've had two pretty dry springs thrown together with sort of 50, 60 mil, which pretty disappointing. But I guess really the last 10 years you've only had a couple of springs which have been average or better. So I'm hoping that trend will turn around quickly. So what is it that makes a difference between those really wet years and dry years? So here we've got really the key ingredients and the key climate drivers that make our part of the world either wetter or drier. And to make rainfall down in our part of the world, we need two really key things. First of all, we need a good source of moisture, which really comes from those warm oceans to our north. And we've got the ElNino Southern Oscillation and the Indian Ocean Dipole, both really important sources of moisture. And some years they send us a lot more moisture, and some years they send us less. And then it's when that moist air hits the cold air down south that gives us a more reliable rainfall record. And you can see here around the South Pole there's the southern annular mode and really strong winds there that has like a conveyor belt for all these cold fronts that flick their tails across southern Australia. So really our wetter years are when we're getting a combination of everything in its wetter phase. So the ElNino Southern Oscillation, so in an El Nino year this part of the world is less helpful in providing moisture for our part of the world. And some years it's in its wetter phase, and it's the same for the Indian Ocean Dipole. It's got its wetter phase and drier phases. So the drought of 2006 had an El Nino in the Pacific, so less moisture from this area feeding into our weather systems, and the Indian Ocean Dipole in 2006 was also in its dry phase. So both of them weren't being helpful, and that's sort of especially behind our drier winter springs. In 2010-11, the spring, we had the LaNina over here where there's extra moisture coming out of these areas, and also the IOD was in its wetter phase, and they were both sort of sending in plenty of moisture, and that again has a good correlation with these wetter years in our part of the world. One of the reasons forecasters look at soil sea surface temperature maps. This is just looking at an anomaly map. These colours here are where an area of ocean might be 2 degrees warmer than its long-term average. This area might be where ocean's cooler than its long-term average. And you can see along here, this is back in September 2006. Warm out here in the Eastern Pacific and El Nino out there, lots of cloud and everything out happening that way. And over in this important area for Australia, these oceans which are often feeding the moisture in, you can see they're cooler than average. And when they're set up like that, there's actually they're in a less helpful mood. More of the moisture is not normally where that warmer seas are. So that's what a drier pattern looks like. And what I want you to do is just have a look at this area here and see if you notice any difference when we move to the spring of 2010. See if you notice any difference. Well, there you have it. That's the October 2010 big La Nina in the Pacific. All the warmer water than average was over in our part of the world, and it just meant that a lot of extra cloud cover and moisture to feed into those weather events down south. And it's the winter springs when that has the main impact here. So seasonal forecasting is really just giving a bit of a heads up of how they're lining up from one year. So we'll just look here at the El Nino pattern when those years are drier across Australia, and this is the La Nina pattern where there's extra moisture coming out of the Pacific. And we're going to look back at what's happened in the previous El Nino years at Bordertown, especially the El Nino years, and what happened in August-October rainfall. So in those 32 El Nino years, normally in the longer term record, there's a third of years of decile 1 to 3, but when we look at just those 32 El Nino years, you can see that 2/3 of them were actually in that dry decile 1 to 3. So quite a strong fingerprint on spring rainfall. You can see there's still a third chance of either average or wetter, but certainly doubles chance of a dry spring in El Nino because there's less moisture coming out of the Pacific. When the La Nina is sending extra moisture, and we look at what's happened in Bordertown in La Nina years, not a stronger signal there. You can probably see 1 in 5 were dry, but and the rest were either average or wetter, but certainly there's a stronger signal there for El Nino. And the Indian Ocean Dipole, when when it's in its drier phase, there's a bit of a correlation with drier springs down this part of the world. And when we look at whenever the ID's been in drier phase at Bordertown, again, August, October rainfall, rather than just a third of those years being dry in the decile 1 to 3, more than half of them were. So really does increase the chance of dry years. And when the ID's in its wetter phase, so you can see here quite a good contributor to moisture, those wetter years, you can see at Bordertown in those springs, really increases the chance of a decile 8, 9, 10 year. There's been the odd probably 1 year that was dry, but really most of them were either average or wet. So quite a strong signal to keep an eye out there for those sort of years. Now, just one thing, analogy I want to make, that when it comes to seasonal forecasts, autumn is a less predictable time of year, and usually our oceans are a bit like our footy teams. They're just still setting themselves up for the year ahead. But once we get to sort of May, June, July, there's a bit more of a lead as to how your footy team's going to be performing, and whether they're in the top four or the bottom four. And it's same too for those oceans. Forecasters have a better idea of which way those oceans are going to zig into either wetter phase or dry phase, or just stay normal. Now, Dale Gray, who works with Ag Victoria, puts out a great newsletter every month which provides commentary on these climate drivers. It's called the Break newsletter, and if you're interested in getting that sent to you once a month, just drop an email to theBreak@ecodev.vic.gov.au. Basically provides updates on what the Indian Ocean Dipole and what the ENSO is up to. Also, we have a YouTube version which comes out once a month as well, and it's probably pretty relevant for your part of the world, because the big climate drivers really that I'm talking about affect you just as much as Victoria. And one of the things you get in there, if you do get the break, is what we call the fast break table, and Dale puts this together. It's basically, these are seasonal forecast models here across the top. It's that's the European one, that's the Bureau of Australia, that's the Japanese, USA, NASA, so a bunch of different climate seasonal forecast models there. And here it is, they've just run them for April, and this is for the next 3 months, May, June, July, May, June, July, and it's sort of, this table just says what they think might be happening in the Pacific, whether it's LaNina or ElNino, what they think might be happening in the Indian Ocean, and then the sort of rainfall prediction. So we can see there for the next 3 months, there's a few of them on average and a couple of them on wetter. So that's all right. These bottom ones here is we're looking at the 4 to 6 months, so August, September, October, and you can see there this one's quite interesting just at the minute, where there's a number of them lining up on that IOD negative, which is the wetter phase, and quite a few of them thinking there's a bit of extra moisture around later in the year. So this table is useful to watch, especially how it changes from 1 month to the next, but it's useful because it gives you a whole range of what the global models are thinking, rather than just one. So if you're interested, drop an email to the break. One thing people often ask is, well, okay, we had the big El Nino in 2015. What typically follows previous El Nino events? So we'll look at. Okay, so my colleague Dale Gray's just crunched some figures here for Bordertown, and basically these are the El Nino years there, you can see there in history. But what is printed is these are the years following the El Nino year, and how was rainfall in those years. And so you can see all the monthly rainfall there. It just sort of split them into, this is the growing season rainfall, and you can see these are decile 8, 9, 10 years, the wetter years, these are the average years, and these are the drier ones. So you can see most of those years following El Ninos were typically either average or wetter. So that's probably good news. And also another thing to note, there was a few IOD negatives there thrown into the BICS there, which is a pretty strong correlation with those wetter years. So that's something to keep an eye on this year. I do know, like, we talk about the 82 drought, and a lot of people talk about good autumn breaks. You can see in the year after the 82 drought, we had 131 mils in March. So everyone thinks that autumns are always reliable after big El Ninos, but clearly they're not. When you look at March, April rainfall after previous El Ninos, there's huge bit of variation there. Anyway, that's an interesting little table. Now, what I've been talking about is largely just good old-fashioned variability and how we read the play from one year to the next. But is there anything different going on that hasn't happened in the past? Okay, so one thing that might be a bit different, this is temperatures going back for the last 100 years. So it's maximum temperatures for Victoria, but it's pretty similar for South Australia too over there at the border. You can sort of see for summer, autumn, winter and spring, I guess the last decade sort of stands out as being a bit warmer than the previous ones. And one of the ones which is a bit unusual, the last 10 years we've had about 7 that have been between, 1, 2 or even 3 degrees warmer than normal. So that's summer turning up a bit earlier. So that's one thing that is a little bit tricky, and it also gives us some bumpy springs, especially if we've got a bit drier conditions. It just brings the season to an end a bit quicker. So that's something we've got to keep an eye on. Also, just some good work by GRDC and CSIRO. This is just looking at frosts in August and November, or these late frosts. And the blue zones here are just showing that a few areas where we've probably been getting more than a fair share of these late frosts in the last few years. And it sort of comes hand in hand with a bit of that dry pattern. So plants are trying to cope with warmer conditions during the day in spring, but also the risk of a frost is still hanging around. And the culprit, well, I guess this is probably the culprit for what gets the blame for our dodgier autumn breaks, and also some of that bumpier springs and frosty conditions. And this is to do with the pressure pattern across southern Australia, and this is the growing season, April to October pressure strength from 1950 through to 2015. And what you can see is here it varies from year to year, and typically these sort of years are ElNino years where there's a higher pressure over Australia, and these are LaNina years. So natural variations in there, but I guess one of the things that the meteorologists point out to us that pressure pattern is just getting a bit stronger now than it was in the past, and so that's sort of part of that summer pressure pattern hangs around a little bit longer. So that's still going to be variable, but that's something that is a bit different compared to that longer term history. And I guess some recent work by the Australian AEGIC just sort of looked at since 2000, a lot of our sort of rainfall seasons, if anything, just nudged a bit further south, which I guess fits with what a lot of farmers have noticed. Now, farmers tell me really we've got no control over what the weather throws at us, but these are all of the things that agriculture's been doing, and farmers have been doing a great job at dealing with all that volatility in seasons and markets. And these are all those things we've got which really help us manage what's under our control. We've got improved technologies, equipment, better genetics and systems these days, a lot of improved investment on farm and regional infrastructure, whether it's to do with storage of water or fodder or communications. I guess growing local and export markets, and this has been a really key one, I guess, improving business management for variable years and income. That's to do with whether it's weather related or just market related. Been really important things, and farmers are getting a lot better around that. Farm planning, minimum till, better management of soils, always having pasture cover. Really with NRM, there's been a huge gain over the last couple of decades on how farmers do that, and really all about how we get the most out of that. What millimetres of rain falls, turning that into production. Modern farmers do a great job. And there's a bit of an observation about all of the things farmers are changing out there to deal with volatility in seasons and markets. I guess I've sort of noticed there's 3 sort of layers of decisions, and these sort of decisions go from the things we tend to do on the run, what I call the first decisions, which we just things we do and get on with from one year to the next. But often amongst it all, there's a need for some bigger decisions, which usually cost a bit more, and that normally has a bit of a knock-on in terms of our systems. But these are the things, and then there's those tougher decisions. But I guess all of these are really things that to deal with more volatility, there's the things we do on the run, but then sometimes there's these more strategic decisions which we've got to think about. What are we going to do to manage this stuff better? And often sometimes it's some of the key decisions we make in the good years when things are going well that really set us up for dealing with those tougher years down the track. And a lot of farmers tell me, a lot of these sort of changes are really the changes that have always been there in front of agriculture, and that the whole trick is trying to find the right ones that suit you and suit what you're planning so you've got a bright future in front of you. So good luck with the year ahead, and hope that was of some use. If you want to get any more information or subscribe, just send an email to the break, and all the best for the year ahead.